I do. I just keep right on leaning on the Lord. Amen. Thank the men of praise for ministering to us in song this morning. Amen. This is the day the Lord has made, and we should rejoice and be glad in it. Familiar verse this morning out of the 30th Psalm, verse number 5, the New International Version is the translation I selected. Psalms 30, verse 5. For his anger lasts only a moment, but his favor lasts a lifetime. Weeping may stay for the night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. Amen. This is my Bible, God's holy word. It is a lamp unto my feet, and a light unto my path. Grass withers, flowers fade, but the word of our God shall stand forever. This is my Bible. This is my weapon, the sword of the Spirit. Amen. Weeping may, in King James says, endure for, but joy comes in the morning. I want you to think on this theme, dance in the dark. Dance in the dark. This 30th Psalm is believed to be both a song of faith and it is a song of praise. David is giving the authorship of this song in review of his life as it is recorded in the scriptures. I think when we look at the life of David, we can concur that it is both a psalm of faith and one of praise. It's a psalm of faith if it was written in connection with the building of the house of God that David never lived to see. He sorely desired, he wanted to build the temple. He wanted to build the house of God. After he had constructed his palace, he had a very, very fine house, and he said, you know what, it is not right that I live in this magnificent dwelling, and the ark of God is out there in a tent. And so he wanted to build this, the temple for God, but he was denied the opportunity. In First Chronicles, chapter 22, it shed some light on God's decision not to allow David to build the temple. He told him, he said, you know, you shed much blood and you fought many wars. You are not to build a house for my name because you've been a man of war. And David's background, that he was such a warrior, and God told him, I want a man of peace to build my house. And subsequently, David's son, Solomon, was given the opportunity to build the temple. David financed that project, though. Prior to his dying, I think I need to say that parenthetically, David financed out of his personal money, go back and read it, and then also out of the state treasurer. That's who God wanted, this man of peace, for he said his house would be a house of prayer for all nations. That's the backdrop if we want to look at this as a psalm of faith. If it's a psalm of praise, then it is one that's in connection with the judgment having been stayed, or a great judgment having been stayed against David and his sin forgiven. That happened in the later years when he was reigning. He's this aged monarch, and he finds himself still beleaguered with persistent enemies. He's old now, and he looks around. He still has some enemies, and they are great in number, and they are giant in stature. And so he wonders if his army is big enough, if his army is strong enough, tough enough, whether or not his army is equipped enough to deal with this relentless and formidable enemy. The Ammonites and the Philistines were consistent and persistent enemies of Israel, and especially David. The Philistines had a hatred for David because, remember, he killed their giant, their celebrated warrior, Goliath. And so they never forgot that. And so it appeared that there was no such thing as a compromise or an armistice between Israel and those enemies. And so therefore, David, he then in turn makes an assessment as to the safety and security of the nation. The Bible isn't explicit as to who he conferred with regarding the national security, his national security concerns, but the Bible does say in 1 Chronicles that Satan stood up to provoke David to number Israel. And that word Satan, really, it just means an adversary. So whether it was a human or a spiritual, whoever it was or whatever it was, it moved David by suggestion to count his soldiers. The text said it provoked him, which meant that it enticed him. David was enticed. He was seduced. And so it's believed that some trusted advisor became the instrument of Satan, a voice to speak doubt in the mind and ear of David. And that voice told him that he needed to take a census to see how large his army was. And here's a man who had been dependent upon God his whole life. But now he decides that he needs to count up his own strength. And that spirit, it influenced David. Even though his nephew Joab tried to talk him out of it, David went ahead and numbered Israel, which some people say it was a matter of his pride. Now, pride can be used two ways. In the positive sense, pride is something that is admirable and necessary. It's associated when you have self-respect and personal dignity, when you have some pride. But on the negative side of that coin, it's associated when you're arrogant and you have this sense of your own importance. But there's no sin that has in it more contradiction and therefore more of an offense to God than pride. Because in Proverbs 16 it says, pride goes before destruction. And in the 29th chapter of Proverbs it says, a man's pride shall bring him low. So God was not pleased when David took the census because David was not delighting in the Lord. He was delighting in his own might. So the thing that motivated him to number the people was the sin of unbelief. David was trusting in numbers as opposed to trusting in God. Then he found himself, as a result of that, he found himself in what we call a sin and mercy situation. He had transgressed divine law, and now he sought mercy. And what's interesting is that in the text, God gave him some options as to the choice of punishment. That's pretty good. God said, I'm going to punish you, I'm going to let you choose. He said, there will either be 3 years of hunger, of famine, or 3 years you're going to be on the run from your enemies, or 3 days of punishment from me. Now, surely, those were the options. It was going to be 3 years of famine, 3 months of being on the run from your enemies, or 3 days at my hand. Now, if David could have it his way, he would want no repercussion at all. But to receive no punishment was not an option. So he reviewed the choices. You can go back and read the story. It's a good story. He reviewed the choices, and he comes to a decision. He knows God. So he said to the prophet, Nathan, come. He said to him, listen, he said, don't let me fall into the hands of man. He said, let me just fall in the hands of God. Since there's no way I can get out of this, since I cannot be exonerated, I'm going to take my chances with God. But whatever happens, please don't let me fall into the hand of man. Because David had learned that God is merciful. And man is cruel. Man is mean. Man is heartless. Man will desire to ruin you. Man wants to see everything you've accomplished destroyed. See, man doesn't know when to quit. He won't stop till he stripped you of everything important to you. So David tells the prophet, I know I have to pay for my sin, but please